You are now entering PaleoRadio.
Welcome to PaleoRadio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Welcome to PaleoRadio, live in studio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. My name is Joe Elder.
I'm the bane of Old Man Monday's existence, Jeremiah Bannister.
And thank you guys for joining us once again. This is a weekly program covering all things philosophic, political, anything you can imagine, we will cover it, and we tell you the truth no matter what. We are not alternative news. There's your intro, folks.
Yeah, we're not alternative news, we're PaleoRadio. We're broadcasting right now out of Public Reality Radio, WPRR, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You can give us a call. We would love for you to be part of the conversation. It's one of the cool things about this show. That number, 616-656-1680. In fact, you know, Joe, I think people ought to just store that number.
Yeah, you ought to.
Just store the number. Seriously, store the number. Put a little notification on there telling you to listen every day, especially on Mondays. You just got to do it. That's why smartphones are there. That's why they made them.
That's right.
Yeah, so that you can program PaleoRadio in your phone.
Put it in there, have it down as the boys, and then give us a call, and we can talk about things, particularly if you agree, disagree. We have an attempt here on the show to cover from both sides, cover the story from both sides and both angles. We do the best that we can. If you feel like we are doing a good job, tell us. If you think we are doing a bad job, you can tell us.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us. Yeah, you can email us at paleoradioshow@gmail.com, or we've actually been encouraging people to do something for the last couple shows, and there was a guy who did. Well, let me take it back. I don't know. Might not be a guy. Might be a lady. It's possible. But went over to iTunes and posted this review. Gave us a 5-star rating. We've got 3 of them. Excellent talk radio show. The show with 2 intelligent hosts tackle topics in the news from a fair angle, examining both conservative and liberal sides of each story. This show will help you to see both sides of the argument rather than spoon-feeding you the answer. While I don't always agree with them, I can respect a show that has stood out and spends every episode trying to provide you with the facts rather than the opinions.
Yes.
And this is by Tantastic. So, you know what? Big round of applause for Tantastic.
Thank you. We don't have a stock applause, so we actually have to supply that ourselves.
Yeah, it makes it more authentic, Joe.
Yeah, it does.
It does. We really go the extra mile for people and clap ourselves rather than provide a cheap clap track.
That's right.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of great topics to cover today, which is it's just a different spread, right? We are going to be covering a lot. We also are going to have Dan Arel, who is a contributor to Patheos. He's going to be on the air at 11 a.m. talking to us.
Dan Arel. It's been so much fun over just the last couple days. It's been really cool actually communicating with Dan. I've followed him for a couple years. I know you have. And sitting there and saying, hey, following a guy's work, saying, I agree sometimes, I disagree sometimes, but mad respect for the guy. He's out there doing hard work. And to finally connect with him, and for it to be a really cool thing. It was nice to see how excited he was about coming onto the show. And listen, he's promised that he's going to go full-blown communist on our program.
Yes,
that's what he told his people. He's going to go full-blown commie.
Comrade Arel is going to be on to chat with us, so that should be a good time.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about Obama's torture report, or a torture report that he doesn't want to talk about or the administration doesn't want to own.
Yeah, a mass exodus of top leaders, as well as a stop and a hold on any kind of information that we might be able to gather from the governor of Michigan over Flint, the Flint water crisis.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, saying, well, you don't need that information.
Yeah, a little bit of news there, just in case people have forgotten. We're closing in on 2 full years without clean, drinkable water for the folks in Flint. Also, there's an article from the American Conservative called Diversity is Hard. That's a really interesting one. It gets into a lot of different topics.
And we're going to talk about Battle Creek, natural selection. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to talk about in this show. And again, 616-656-1680. Oh, but Joe, so much in the news, my man.
Yes. Well, quite a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit in the news. And actually, you shared something with me, and I don't have anything prepared as much for this part of it, but the stuff going on at the airports.
Yes.
And actually I watched the governor of Washington. He came out and was talking about what was happening in one of the big airports there and giving his thoughts on the constitutionality of things, just how badly it was done, right? He was criticizing, saying these people aren't even really good at their jobs. I mean, whatever they're doing here, they did it very poorly. But there's been just the optics of it, the stuff going out, and in fact, the rising up against it. But it's not just with that. It's also with people apparently saying that they're done. They're out, especially at the State Department. They don't want to work for Trump anymore.
Yes, there's been a mass exodus of people leaving the State Department. A lot of them are head officials. And to break that down a little bit more, the way that people need to understand it is, excuse me, there's a good amount of folks that are in senior positions of the Secretary of State level, and they stay there whether there's Republicans or Democrats. They haven't left. They've been through many different institutions. But these folks have decided now that they're going to be heading on out. They're leaving kind of Trump's transition team or Trump's new team high and dry in terms of management. So it's an interesting article. We're going to get into it here in just a moment.
There's an ongoing mass exodus at the State Department of people who don't want to work for Trump. It's by Pamela Engel at Yahoo Finance and also Business Insider, if I remember correctly, talking about how all these career diplomats, is quote, who have served under presidents from both parties, 2 other senior leaders in the State Department left earlier this month. You have Post columnist Josh Rogan characterizing this as, quote, an ongoing mass exodus of senior Foreign Service officers who don't want to stick around for the Trump era. David Wade, who was the State Department's chief of staff under Secretary of State John Kerry, told the Post that it's, quote, the single biggest simultaneous departure of institutional memory that anyone can remember. Department expertise in security, management, administrative, and consular positions in particular are very difficult to replicate and particularly difficult to find in the private sector.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of these people, and it's interesting. It's the State Department and the people that they talk about and how they're leaving. A lot of these people, and this is before they get into any kind of explanation, but just the first thought I had is a lot of these people, I wouldn't be surprised that they'd be gone, that they would want to leave. I mean, they have an idea of the world and of America's role in it that is, it was kind of on the chopping block in this election, just in general, on the left and the right. It was a lot of people on the left and the right that said, we don't like the direction of how the state's being run and how a lot of our foreign affairs are being done, even the philosophy that kind of drives that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people who've been there for a long time, they were there and they guided the ship through the terrible waters of George W. Bush when people were angry, as well as Barack Obama when people didn't much care for some of the things. And so that was my first thought.
Yes.
That was my first thought about it, is that I wasn't necessarily surprised, even though the number of them can be a bit surprising.
Yes. Right. Well, I think it decreases the chances of success for the incoming group, is what I think.
Right.
Whether or not they chose to leave because of philosophical differences, their expertise is something that's not easily replicated. So I think that's the biggest issue is, what is the incoming State Department going to be able to do, and are they going to be able to put the right people in the right places? Are they going to be able to have a smooth flowing system? I mean, we'll see, but I think you hit the nail on the head. The bigger point is that there is a different administration coming in that has a different idea about how to do geopolitics, entirely how to change up geopolitics. And it's well, let me put it this way. In my opinion, I think it's their new way of working it is an unworkable way. But I think they're only going to find that out in practice. But if you're in the State Department and you have a choice to make, do you want to be part of that or not? And I think they're choosing to jump ship.
You know, I think that 2 statements are worthy of reflection. One is by the American Foreign Service Association. They released a statement, and they said this, quote, while this appears to be a large turnover in a short period of time, a change of administration always brings personnel changes, and there's nothing unusual about rotations or retirements in the Foreign Service. Indeed, both are essential to the development of a steady stream of experienced leaders ready to assume critical roles at state. But that it's true, right, that you see these kind of transitions, but there's something in that people need to really think about, and that is saying it's essential to the development of a steady stream of experienced leaders. The problem, and this was brought up by Ambassador Richard Boucher, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. I apologize if I'm not. But saying that usually senior officials work at least with new incoming administrations to determine who should stay on, right? Or even how to do their job, for example, right? Like we do people do this in corporate all the time. That if you end up having somebody that you've contracted out, a lot of times those people that you've contracted, you're no longer interested in their services. But the idea of just saying one's in, one's out without any kind of transitional training, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this.
No,
but it would seem that it would be a very useful thing for people to at least have some kind of training from the people who were there before, even just to say this is how the grind works every day. Like, scrap the philosophical part. This is how a day-to-day grind of working this job and what it actually requires.
Yeah, from the perspective of management, it can cause a lot of different problems because that expertise is what's really needed. Josh Rogan goes on in the article and says, the emptying of leadership in the management bureaus is disruptive because those offices need to be led by people who know the department and have experience running its complicated bureaucracies. So,
Right.
Well, and this is the other thing. The group that's coming in is planning on trying to simplify the bureaucracy. So, I mean, it is a different philosophical position. It's not really how do you manage it. It's we're going to see if we even need to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So there's going to be positives to that, and there's going to be negatives to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to say that it isn't, I can't, as someone who is not entirely full-blown liberal, I can't say that I have a serious problem with someone saying we're going to evaluate all departments of government and decide if we think it's efficient or not, if it needs to be transferred, if it needs to be swept. You know, I'm not against that idea. I'm honestly against the judgment of the group that says they're doing it. That's who I think their judgment is poor.
And hey, you know what? It's a valid thing. You're saying the process is a valid process. The people making the determinations throughout that process, suspicious.
Yeah,
skeptical, very much in doubt. I'll tell you what's not in doubt is this is a fantastic show. You're listening to PaleoRadio right here at 95.3 FM, 1680 AM, broadcasting every Monday from 10 to noon right here in Grand Rapids. Tons of great stuff. We've got an interview later with Dan Arel from Patheos. It's going to be tons of fun.
Stick around, folks. Don't miss it. We're going to continue talking about what's going on here with the mass exodus in Trump's department. 95.3 FM, 1680 AM.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
Oh, man, Joe. The Battle Creek situation is really rough. And, you know, Battle Creek, man, that's my hometown.
Yeah, it's the old stomping ground.
It is. It's my old stomping ground. It's where I was born and raised, right there in the creek. It's true, man.
You're born by the creek in
It's
a little
true.
tent.
It's a rough place now. It just is. But there was somebody sent, I don't know if it was Autumn or who it was, but somebody sent an article talking about students at Kellogg Community College, right? And this was a national story. Washington Times reported on it and other things, but it was right there in my stomping ground. And it was talking about these two people who were arrested and spent nearly 7 hours in jail for their unapproved distribution of the U.S. Constitution.
How
and
dare
for
they?
allegedly attempting to recruit other people to their club. Yeah, the offenses, quote unquote, resulted in demands the students remove themselves from campus property. The students refused to leave and were arrested by campus police and charged with trespassing. Did you watch the video of that?
I had not seen the video of it.
Oh,
They
goodness.
get walked out.
Well,
correct?
they're told. I mean, the police officer is the girl puts her hands behind her back. The police officer is telling her that she's banned forever, indefinitely, from the facility. She can't be on the property anymore.
Wow.
You know, and so
It's
all
pretty
this,
harsh.
yeah, it's hardcore. According to the Washington Times, Scottsdale, Arizona-based Alliance Defending Freedom, a nonprofit legal organization that, quote, advocates for the right of people to freely live out their faith, filed a lawsuit on their behalf Wednesday in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan. A senior ADF counsel, Casey Maddox, issued a statement wherein ADF claims their clients' constitutional rights supersede any unlawful school rules denying them such freedoms. And it was weird to even think about the existence of such rules and then going through and finding out the rules were just kind of blew my mind. But what do you think about that? A client's constitutional rights to freedom of speech supersede any unlawful school rules. I mean, I guess that would be true if the statement was true.
Yeah, if the statement is true, it's kind of like, when did you quit beating your wife type thing. It's a way of getting someone to admit the unlawfulness of the rule before they play it out. I mean, you'd have to take it to court here. But the response that they said was, Kellogg Community College had established several rules regarding the exercise of free speech and had established a free speech zone, which I think are hilarious. Free speech zones. That's funny. Additionally, the distribution of materials, according to the college, must be approved first by the department known as Student Life. In other words, the exercise of students' First Amendment rights, according to the U.S. Constitution, is regulated by the public schools' Student Life Department, and the school defines free speech as solicitation, other activities which must be pre-approved.
Yeah, another activity. It's just, to sit there and say, well, boy, I guess it'd be one thing, because I went to a private school, and so did you. I went to Olivet College.
Yep.
And at Olivet College, they had a student life center, and you had to go, if you wanted to post a poster or you wanted to post something around the school, you would have to get authorization first. It would have to have a stamp on it. They tried to make sure – they had certain rules, like it was an advertising group, basically. They'd give an imprimatur on what you were allowed to advertise, how you were allowed to advertise, et cetera. But as a private school, they were also capable of having you sign basically a covenant. It's compact, right? And you're saying, I'm signing a compact with the school that I will abide by certain things, that I live in a certain way, and that I'll do this. That's all private school stuff.
Well,
right?
I went to a public school, and they did the same thing.
At a public school?
Yeah, at both of them.
When you were in college?
I didn't. Yeah, I've never attended a private school. So, when I was in college, I was at Saginaw Valley, and they had the same exact thing. You had to have a student program, and the student program had to be run through, and they had to approve it. It was very similar to if you wanted to play basketball at the basketball hoops and everything, or go to the Ryder Center, which was their athletic facility. You had to sign a waiver, and the waiver was the rules that you had to abide by to play in the Ryder Center.
Here's the definition from the KCC website. Quote, solicitation is defined as activities or events normally in short duration, as the carrying or displaying of signs or placards, leafleting, campaigning, marches, rallies, parades, demonstrations, protests, assemblies, speeches, circulation of petitions, and or any public demonstration on the grounds.
Yeah, so that's a lot more than solicitation.
Yeah, that's what they but that's what they're defining.
That's what they're roping that all into one. So, yeah, just to be clear, they're basically saying any form. I mean, when they said speeches, circulation of petitions, I mean, that's solicitation's a little bit different. I mean, when I think solicitation, I think exchange of money. But maybe I'm wrong.
Right. Yeah, and demonstrations, protests.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's
get pre-approved protests.
I mean, I guess that protesting would be solicitation. You're hoping that the people around you will agree, I guess. Beyond that, I don't really understand that. But there it is. Speech is defined as solicitation. Also at issue, and this is in the quoting here, is the need to have a permit to express one's free speech at an assigned table where participants cannot even, quote unquote, call out to passerbys.
Yeah, that's a very heavy restriction on your free
speech.
Really,
really, really heavy restriction. I don't know. So again, it would be interesting to talk to a lawyer about this. Maybe, someone who defends campus liberties and freedoms to say, what is this all about? That you can't even call out to somebody. Let's say you have a booth and you go, hey, would you like to see our stuff? I mean, I guess that's closer to solicitation at that point.
At least because you have a booth there and you have objects that you're trying to at least get them to look at or something.
Yeah.
But one of the administrators told the supporters that engaging in conversation on their way to educational places is also a violation of the solicitation policy because it is, quote, an obstruction to their education to ask them questions like, do you like freedom and liberty? adding that I'm sorry, that one was just great. Adding that he was concerned that the students from rural farm areas might not feel like they have a choice to ignore the question.
That's an official statement.
That's an official statement, which I think is degrading to rural farm boys like me.
Gosh.
He's basically saying I can't avoid getting roped into "Do I love freedom?" question, which he's right. I can't, and I do love freedom. America.
Why? You would think, actually, it's interesting that they choose that group of people. It would seem that group of people would just be like, yeah, get her done. I mean, you would think that that's in the ballpark.
Yeah, by the way,
I don't...
Yeah, it's an obstruction to their education. I'm just saying it again. It's an obstruction to their education to ask questions like, do you like freedom and liberty? And he added that he was concerned that students from, quote, rural farm areas might not feel like they have a choice to ignore the question.
Can you imagine the scenario? Okay, imagine a situation, just a Saturday Night Live skit, where you've got this rural farm guy walking up and he's got a backpack, and some person from a club says, hey, sir, do you like freedom and liberty? And he goes... You know, you're harming my experience of education. Exactly. And he goes running away. I'm just thinking, how ridiculous of a situation is that? Or even somebody with real sad music, you know, on some kind of a piano, and his head just kind of slowly goes down. And it's like, this is really harming my experience in education. Like, give me a break.
What an obscure choice. It's for the farm kids. Those farm kids, you know, when you ask them about freedom, it blows their minds. They have to stop what they're doing and start a riot. Like, it's questionable at best.
Barham added, quote, ignoring this duty, KCC arrested these club supporters for exercising this freedom and, ironically, for handing out copies of the very document, the Constitution, that protects what they were doing.
Yes. Yes. So, well, and I think we hit that fine line because there is also the line of when we're talking about private institutions, and this is what you and I were saying, like, I think they get a little bit more wiggle room. You know, if someone is behaving a way that is not illegal but is unacceptable in your bar or in your restaurant, you can throw them out. And there's certainly maybe free speech laws that are violated when they're not saying anything derogatory, but they are being a pain in the butt and you don't want them in your store anymore. And I'm wondering, it's an interesting game to play because when you're in a college institution, you have to have rules that are set for everybody, and it is kind of like a community within a community sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting way to play this out, I think. I don't know. I think it's odd, but at the same time, I can understand why the school has gone about making rules for just having randomly people crashing into campus with petitions to sign. What if they're 50-year-old, 60-year-old activists that have nothing to do with campus, but they're just walking around school campus all day getting petitions signed?
Right.
Are they allowed? Would they be allowed to do that? Sure, but usually they have to get some sort of like day pass or something. They can't keep swooping in every day, right? And that's kind of the concept.
And talking about people we should reach out to, at the end of the article it says attorney, and I'm hoping it's properly spelled, Jeshua Lauka of the Grand Rapids law firm David and Waringa, PC, is serving as local counsel in the case filed in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan. So, hey, we can reach out to this guy. He's in Grand Rapids. Yeah. Maybe get him in studio.
We'll make a call and see what we can talk
I got to do it.
But it is a very, very interesting topic. Stick around, folks. We're going to be moving on to some other things like diversity being hard from the American conservative or Mexico bracing for a humongous exodus as the U.S. Trump effect hurts the peso. There's going to be that and a lot more. Stick around.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
If you love PaleoRadio, and I know that you do because you're a fantastic human being, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. It is PaleoRadio.com/Twitter or Twitter.com/PaleoRadio or PaleoRadio Show on Facebook. We are very active in social media. We make our own memes. Sean Spicer's talked about us. Charles Darwin has spoken about us, about listening to our podcast on his iPhone, all sorts of good jazz. So if you love that stuff, please follow us on our social media. We would love to chat with you.
Yeah, and speaking of Facebook, I got to say this, Mark Zuckerberg, you totally suck, man. We're sitting there, old Zucky. Boy, Zucky sucks. So the thing is like we go in, we make this super dank meme with a super amazing and fantastic, fabulous advertisement, in fact, saying that, I think it said something like, reason number 62 why PaleoRadio is the new #1 live talk radio call-in morning show in Grand Rapids, Michigan, on Mondays from 10 to noon. That's and a smiley face at the end. It is the most specific thing we could possibly do. And they chalked it up as fake, and I said, I defy you, Mr. Zuckerberg.
Challenge.
I challenge you to demonstrate to me. You need to fill out a paper to me to say how that's fake news. It's totally legit.
It is. It's
totally
absolutely
100% legit.
It is legit. And what else is legit is that diversity is hard.
Yes. This is one of those articles, Joe, where I don't agree with everything in it, and I enjoy talking about articles like this. It's kind of boring if we just agree with every single thing that we're reading and talking about. But this one, per usual, per custom, predictably, American conservative, diversity is hard. Its boosters must recognize that there are real losers. And this is by Addison Del Mastro. He's an Italian-American. And he talks about looking at Chinatown, Little Italy, Jewish delis and Greek diners. And this is just in the area of food around where he lives. I think he lives in Maryland. To realize how deeply American culture has been influenced by immigrants from all over the globe. Diversity contributes to our country's richness, and an experience of people and cultures from many backgrounds can make us more humane. I think all thus far entirely true.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Especially the humane part.
Yeah, it does make it more humane. I think it gives people a better level of understanding, and I know this is always that cliche thing, but it is open-mindedness. It's the ability to see people living differently and be okay with it, and actually engage in that culture and experience that culture, see what it's like, get to know people. There's a heavy benefit to it, but what Del Mastro is bringing up, too, is that there is some trade-offs. Mm-hmm. And he goes on and says, the cheerleaders for diversity on the left, and even sometimes the right, too often refuse to acknowledge that there are trade-offs. Diversity does alter the way we live. This may, on a measure, be good, but without a doubt it happens. Mm-hmm. If the left wants to preserve support for an open, welcoming nation, which is now under threat from a long-simmering force unleashed by the Trump campaign, they must be willing to recognize that there is some legitimacy to nostalgia in a particularistic attachment to that nostalgia. Yeah. So Andy Griffith's show, kind of.
That's a real thing.
Yeah,
right.
Leave it to Beaverish.
Yeah, leave it to Beaverish. Hey, I grew up on that stuff, and I know a lot of people who have a nostalgia for that. In fact, it was so funny. I saw, and it was terribly misguided, but I saw, I think it was Baked Alaska. He's one of the alt-right trolley guys, and he retweeted something, and it was like, boy, I'll never forgive the people who gave away this culture. And it was a boy and a girl. The boy is wearing a nice-looking kind of suit, but not necessarily meant for the highest of occasions. And the woman was wearing a nice little kind of dress, but almost kind of casual. And they're sitting at a table, and they're drinking out of the same shake. It's a black and white picture. It's an old picture.
Yeah.
And I thought about it, and I said, malt shops are still around, but you don't go to them.
That's right.
You don't go on dates there anymore.
You could get 2 straws at Mickey D's and have a McShake or a McFlurry and share it. Hey, The rules haven't changed. It's just, it is true, though, that culturally things have moved on. We've also moved on from the rail car and the newspaper in terms of when we ride into town. Now we look at our phones, but the concepts are still the same. There's many things that are similar.
I thought about it. I said, that whole concept and that image, that icon, right, of a day and age where that is, and it really is iconic, that sipping out of the same malt at the malt shop on a date. I mean, that is an iconic thing for that time frame. It's not like there was some nefarious force up high, right, like the New World Order that said, how are we going to make it so that the culture doesn't have shake dates anymore? I mean, it's just not real. That there's nobody up there puppeteering society in such a way that just vanishes and disappears. It's kind of like popping collars or Miami Vice. Yeah. It just goes away.
Or the Harlem Shake.
Or the Harlem Shake.
Where did the Harlem Shake go?
Where did it go? Right.
It disappeared.
It just disappeared.
Mambo number 5, right? We have tons of these things.
Yes. Yeah, the Mambo number 5, dude. The fact that you just dropped that. What was another one? Not Loco Caracha.
The Macarena.
The Macarena.
Yeah, I knew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but just bringing it up with music, and I know people
Right.
are like, how are you comparing cultures to music? The reason why we're doing it is to say that music, the culture of music, moves faster and into different genres quicker. But people see the coming and going of cultural ages in music and dance very easily, and we also see it in our dress. But the thing too is, in a slower level, our own communities do adapt and change and evolve over time, every single day, incrementally getting a little bit more different. And that is not I don't think it's a bad thing, but it does involve threats to certain people and certain status quos, and you have to acknowledge that if you're planning on getting it to change.
Yeah. And it goes on in the article and says, but diversity takes work, and it can be exhausting. And, you know, that stood out to me. And, in fact, I like that it was italicized, the word work, you know, because there's just kind of this – it seems that when a lot of people talk about it, that it's kind of just this impersonal force that just happens.
Yeah, it's like
And
all
that
natural.
Yeah, it's kind of like osmosis. You know, you just stand passively and absorb it. Right?
Yeah, it hits you and
yeah, it's there, folks. We can't do nothing about it. But it says life is a little more exciting and a little more uncomfortable. It's true. Routine tasks, especially those involving communication, take a kind of conscious effort that they do not in a homogeneous community.
yes,
Yeah,
which is true.
it's true. You know, that think of the convenience of that in a day and age where it was far more singular, right? In its expression, its language, its culture, its traditions, its mores, its you name it, across the board, religion, and how easy it is when you use that as the mode of communication. It's easy because everybody's kind of at least on similar pages.
Well, that's how
Right.
you can. That's how communities and cultures and societies are built. So when people are trying to take that out from it, you have to have an understanding that it doesn't have to be a religion, it doesn't have to be the state or anything like that, but groups have to have an aligned sense of moral connectivity to something, which is to say they have the same laws and beliefs in certain social norms, and different communities have different social norms. And that's the thing is, I think this conversation really has to involve talking about what social norms are as well, where people, for instance, in our society, if you don't use forks and a knife when you're eating spaghetti at the table, people recognize that as wrong, even though there's no rule that says you have to eat your spaghetti with a fork and a knife.
Yeah.
But people know they notice quickly, bang, this person's not following a rule. Or you're at the grocery store and someone's looking at the hot dogs, or you're looking at the hot dogs, better yet, and someone walks right up to you and stands not even 6 inches next to you and stares at the hot dogs. The stranger does.
Yeah.
You know, it's a social norm violation. And these are small things that when people are trying to say it doesn't feel right and I'm having problems with it, don't think of them as someone who's being a racist a-hole. They're someone who doesn't understand social norms and communal change, and they need more understanding than they need to be ridiculed.
Yeah, as it happens, quoting the article, the left-leaning news site Vox recognized it, though perhaps inadvertently, in an article about safe spaces. The author, a Black University of Chicago graduate, writes that if you want diversity, you also need safe spaces. Quote, being diverse isn't easy, and our diversity ain't free. Don't let us in if you can't make room for us. End quote. He recounts how various safe spaces on campus, like the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs, provided a place for him to escape the, quote, relentless hate and ignorance, end quote, that he faced in the broader campus community, a place to be with people just like himself. It was his very ability to withdraw from diversity that made diversity tolerable and useful.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting observation, that when you have a public space that's diverse, that because it takes work, because it's difficult and will require you to actually do some gymnastics a little bit, you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to learn to be limber, right?
Yeah.
In some of your approaches to things, that when it gets difficult and when that interchange in the way that it's developing, when it gets hard, for people to have a place that they can go that they say, man, I can escape from that for a moment.
Yeah, that's true.
You know?
Yeah. And I think that it does play a real role in it, because it's just like you said, if it is a hard thing and it requires work, it's something that people will need a reprieve from. And I'm not saying that as in a reprieve like you permanently don't talk to people of different groups. I'm saying it as in the public sphere is a diverse one, and the private one, people need to have areas where they don't feel like they have to play that game. And that is involved in all races. Going back into the article, of course, white people in majority-minority neighborhoods are not subject to, quote, relentless hate and ignorance by people who don't look like them. Mm-hmm. But I do think this black student's feelings of displacement is, psychologically, quite similar to what an aging white couple in a place like Langley's Park would experience when their community is diversified. And if that feeling of exclusion is a legitimate basis for public policy when it's felt by a black college student, then in fairness, it must be treated as significant when it's felt by others too.
That's a tough pill to swallow in some ways. I mean, it's one of those things where when we talk about privilege and we recognize privilege, when we recognize how that plays itself out in society, to then step back and say, well, what if we look at how someone who grew up in a certain area feels, just strictly speaking about feelings, right? Not anything beyond that, just how someone feels. That feeling of no longer being in the same place, that the place is dramatically different. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of the people that live in a majority-minority neighborhood. Mm-hmm. You know, and the neighborhood surrounding me beyond that, the part of town, would be that case. I don't feel that. I don't feel that tough,
no.
Right? But I'm also not the 70-year-old white couple, right?
That's right.
In a place that's been a place looking and feeling a certain way for a long time. Yeah. So, do they experience those emotions? Yes.
Yes.
Should those feelings be heard? Yes. But it would have more to do with the arguments, I think, than how someone personally feels.
But we can do both at the same time.
Yeah. And
having the and/or is the problem. Like, if we look at it and we say, well, you're just going to, I shouldn't care about it because you're crying your crocodile white tears for diversity changing for the group. I totally understand that feeling. And internally, you can hold that feeling. That's not a problem. I mean, I think that many people do. But if you're trying to get the person to change their mind, and you're trying to get them to change their mind towards what you're thinking, it's going to require patience, it's going to require empathy, and it's going to require you explaining things in a way that may take a little bit longer. For instance, this is an analogy I use. I'll throw a bone to you folks. Here's one that I try to use. I say, think about it like a pedestal. At the Olympics and the pedestal, and you have like the bronze, the silver, all that. And I think about majorities and minorities in power like that pedestal, and how people are sitting one above the other, and it's not even, and the board isn't even. And you say, I would not be surprised if they were to stand on a flat board after standing on the pedestals, that some people would feel like they've moved up, and some people would feel like they've moved down, but overall, everyone is getting treated more equally. And so that's the way to, I think, explain it. Because look, Jeremiah, last I checked, you were a white guy.
I am white.
I happen to be white. I always like when people say that.
Yeah.
That's a joke. I happen to be white. My family is white. My grandparents were white. They had racial issues. You know what I mean? Mm. Per the age, I listened to my grandparents say some pretty ridiculous things. And if I had a chance to talk to them now, I think I would use the analogy of the pedestal. And say, look in the podium and say, look at, you would feel like you're losing ground here, but that's because you have to make room for opportunity for other people. You can't be where you're at, if you are where you're at where you are because of the expense of other people. You're at the top of the pedestal at the expense of others. You're going to have to move down to even it out.
I like how he brought up another issue. And it's an issue that I don't agree with entirely, but I know the argument, and it actually makes sense to bring it up. And he brings up free trade and says, as with the boosters of mass immigration and diversity, free trades advocates have long resisted coming clean about the cost. National Review's Kevin D. Williamson has dismissed the fading culture of Middle America as nothing more than, quote, sanctimony about struggling Rust Belt factory towns and, quote, cheap theatrical Bruce Springsteen crap. some recognition, and this is back to the point, some recognition that there's loss taking place would go a long way toward ameliorating the pain. It's one thing to be frank that society is not cast in stone, that things change, and that we are often the better for it in the long run. It's quite another thing to claim that nothing is being lost at all, and that if you believe otherwise, you're a racist, a bigot, or deplorable.
Exactly right. Well, that's what I mean by about the crocodile white tears thing. And when people say, oh, yeah, whatever, it's Bruce Springsteen crap. That group of folks is not going to disappear when the cultural structure changes to be more inclusive and more diverse. That group's still going to be there. And you have to think about that in terms of emotional response. Hey, look, am I saying to pander to white folks that are dealing with having a more diverse country? No, but you have to have at least a little bit of empathy and understand where they're coming from. You're not excusing it. You're not saying it's the best thing in the world. But if you want people to change their mind, again, empathy, patience, you have to have a level of understanding.
We'll be right back after this with Stan on the line talking about diversity. You're listening to Paleo Radio.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
Apparently, Charleston, South Carolina's Fancy Pants Central, Joe.
Apparently so.
I was watching this video, and it said South Carolina parking space going for $74,000.
$74K.
$74,000 if you would like this Fancy Pants parking space.
Holy wow.
And what it is, it's a lifetime parking spot in Charleston. They even have lifetime payment plans.
Hey,
you would need to do that.
Yeah, who's going to?
You would need to.
Well, I can't say who's going to anymore with the level of income inequality. There probably is someone who can be like, here's $74K on the dot.
Yeah, I want that spot right there.
Holy
yeah,
crap.
And so I'll tell you, it was crazy because they were asking people about it and asking them, how much would a lifetime parking spot be in Charleston? The guy who guessed it correctly, I mean, he said, I think he said 75,000, something like that. He said 75,000. He said it's not surprising at all. It's a beautiful place to live.
Yeah,
that's how he guessed it. And they said, "How did you?"
75,000.
They said, "How did you know?" And he goes, "Oh, he said it's not surprising. It's a beautiful place."
I just have a good eye for how much parking spaces cost.
If it was lifetime.
Yeah, what an obscure skill to have.
All righty, we're getting back to this. The BEC crew over at Science Alert. Oh yeah, you know what? Before we do that, why don't we do this? That's the right thing to do. Stan the man. He's calling from GR. He's listening on 95.3 FM. What's going on, Stan?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, I just want to make a quick comment about what you're talking about, diversity.
Fire away.
And one of my, when I was on the air there, it was a long time ago, I guess it was last year or year before, I used to always say, when race came up, I always say I've been black almost all my life.
Yeah.
And the reason that I say that is that you're taught to be black. When you're born in a family unit, you're just a member of that unit. You're not black, white, whatever. As you become enculturated, you're taught, first of all, what your race is. Then you look at, all you see is from a child's eyes. Everybody looks the same. Then all of a sudden everybody looks different. But they're still the same. There's no difference in race. Racism and race, the concept of race, has to be taught to a child. And that when one person is this way, therefore they look like this, therefore they act like this. And so I just like to throw it out there and have you guys comment on it. Any race, you're taught to be white, you're taught to be black, you're taught to be a boy or a girl. You're taught, this is what boys do, this is what girls do, this is what your race does, this is what the other races do. So I just throw that out there and let you guys throw it around a little bit.
Yeah.
That's actually a highly contentious subject.
It is.
It is. Because on the one hand, and I'm glad that Stan's the one who said this, and it's not just two white guys saying this, but that people are taught this way. And one of the difficulties, let's say, for example, that a parent says, well, I'm going to raise my kid in a way that is colorblind to race, right? Saying I am just going to jettison the concept. The problem is there's a significant number of people from all races that say there's pride in our ancestry. There's pride in our customs or our traditions, our history, our language, our religion. And a lot of people identify with their forefathers. And they say, this is what makes us who we are. And they look at it not just through the lens of an individual, but they look at it more sociocentric, right? That they have an identity not just to themselves, but they also have an identity within a larger societal construct, which is where you get identity politics in a way, or even just politics in general.
Well, and
an extent.
Nationalism is an extension of identity, so people get the love of country and the love of ancestry combined together, and you mix that with common beliefs such as early religion. That's why people stick to certain norms, and that's also, I think I would say better yet, it's also why people are always so blown away if they take a gene test. A test of their genetics, because they will say things like, I'm French, I'm German, I'm British, or what have you, and then they'll take a mouth swab and have their genome ran, and it come to find out that they're from all over the place.
There's a video.
And that concept is just shattering for a lot of folks because of their connection with identity and nationalities. And so with what Stan's saying is, how do you get there, though? You're taught that, but this makes me think of a book that I'm reading even right now, The Blank Slate by Steven Pinker. He's talking about this exact thing of saying the blank slate theory is not necessarily the strongest theory to operate out of. You and what you think is a neutral mind is a mind that's hinged and based entirely on an evolution of survival tactics that give you a false impression of the way things are, and your natural impulses are possibly more well built into your personality than we even want to give off. And that's because we're not entirely a blank slate when we're born. We are predisposed to behaving certain ways, and it's all in our genome. Like when people have the nature and nurture argument, it's actually nature or nature, because your nature produces the nurture as well. It's nature argument. There's
a video, actually, where they take people, many of whom are really hardcore about their ethnicity. They're really hardcore about their nationality. They are hardcore about their customs. Like you got, of course, the Irish guy. I'm totally Irish.
Yep. And you have the British guy who hates Germans.
The British guy who hates Germans.
The French girl who is absolutely French, doesn't want to be British.
Yeah.
The girl who is from Pakistan and hates Turkey.
A black man.
Or she's Armenian and she hates Turkish people. And lo and behold, British guy is actually from Germany. French girl is from Britain. Part of her family ancestry is from Britain. And the girl that was Armenian has Turkish relatives.
And they were all surprised. Some of them cried.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them cried, but they all their minds were blown. And I posted some, and I saw a lot of people posting stuff in solidarity with immigrants and refugees over the last week. And I saw some people that said, descended from immigrant or whatever, immigrant descendant or something like that, as overtop their picture, like a layout that they can put on their profile, right? And so I saw that, and I thought, Bannister, the surname, the general history of that surname is that they were settlers. They were British settlers in the 17th century. So, but I said at the end of that, I've never done a formal investigation into my personal history. I'm not going to just base it on a surname general.
It's
and
a
I'm
rough
like,
guess.
it's a rough guess. And I'm like, so I'm, and the crest is totally fake, by the way. So I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, okay, this is a made up crest for this thing. I don't even know about how legit this is. But, to say that I have never taken a DNA test, and I actually mentioned that in the status update on my Facebook page to say, this is the case, but I don't really know. I would like to maybe look into it further, and I might be surprised. I mean, it could be not only informative but illuminating, in fact, as to who I am and what where I think I came from, etc. Yeah.
Well, and I think it shatters people's concept of the nationality, which is to say that when you think you're born from a certain place and everybody in your family is from that place and it's all connected, there is no splintering. It's one huge, well-built pyramid of a structure. And when people come to realize that if you're basing all your decisions on being American, I'm American, right? When you base your ideas entirely on that, I think you're losing. You find out, or many people come to find out, that they're losing a part of themselves in that decision when they didn't think they had anything to lose. For instance, they think, I'm not from anywhere but the U.S. or better yet, European nations. If you're a Anglo-Saxon white person, you'd say, all my family's been from Holland. We are Dutch. We're from Holland. That is who we are as people. And you find out that you're from a couple different areas. It blows your mind as to the decisions you've made about being a person from Holland, right? And that is a serious thing about getting people to realign their beliefs and how they align politically with other groups.
Yeah, and if you're under the impression, I mean, I know a lot of these guys, and I hate ragging on the Irish, but it's really in America.
I'm Scottish, so I'm Scottish-ish.
There's just so many people that I know who they swear up and down that they're full blown Irish, right? I mean, that's what they are, and it doesn't matter what their names are. It doesn't matter anything else. That's their identity, and yet I would love to see what would happen if they did the swap test. I mean, hey, maybe they are. Right, but just to see how that actually impacts the way that individuals view themselves, how they view other people, how they view other traditions, it's got to be mind-boggling. I would love to actually even just speak with some of the people who've had that done, even in the video, and just say, what was that like for you? What was it like? What was on the line in your life? What did you identify with in such a way that it became central to the way that you presented yourself publicly for years that was shattered by what you learned?
Yeah.
And how have you dealt with it since?
And what's it been like?
Has it changed you at all? And I would be interested in that. And of course, I'd be interested in getting one of those DNA tests. I'll tell you what I'm most interested in, Joe, and this is a really big deal, is in a matter of a couple moments, we are going to be speaking with Dan Arel of Patheos. The time is almost here. And I got to read this. I saw this yesterday. I saw that he shared it. He was sharing our post. We made a meme on Facebook. Find us at facebook.com/PaleoRadio. But we made this meme, and it says, forget about Nazi punching. We have our government to overthrow. Dan Arel, he shared it. And he said, a reminder that this is tomorrow morning. This is last night. I've basically snapped over the last 24 hours, so tune in to hear me go full communism. So You're going to have to – apparently Trumpism has bypassed his last nerve, and he's just done, and he's going to let loose apparently on this program. And so we're going to have him. You'll be able to call after the interview. I don't think we're going to be taking any calls during the interview. We'll talk about it during the break. But the number to call is 616-656-1680. And make sure to go on Facebook and share this information with your friends. Let them know that Dan's going to be on and that we're going to be talking about things ranging from the resistance. What makes that a good or efficient means of opposing Trump and Trumpism? We're going to talk a little bit. I don't want to focus too much, and neither does Joe, but to focus on violence in general and the arguments about violence against political opponents. So there's a whole bunch of these topics that we want to bring up with Dan.
Yes. Yeah, there's going to be a lot to talk about. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I just am very, very excited. I think Dan is a great guy. We're going to have a fantastic topic here, and we're going to get to it. I'm excited to talk to him because we've had this whole thing in the atheist community about Richard Spencer and punching Nazis, and we're going to get to talk about that on a deeper level. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah,
basically a snake eating itself alive. I shared a meme about that and said, watching secular movement messiahs eat each other alive, eating popcorn, gnawing off my favorite stick of licorice and drinking from my favorite mug of hot cocoa while watching this. And I shared a picture of a snake eating itself. And so it was an interesting thing. But we don't want to get wrapped up too much in that. But we want to talk to Dan Arel, and we will right after this break, Joe.
Yes, we will. We're going to be talking about Dan Arel. We're going to be talking about natural selection causing a decline in human education genes. This is by some scientists out of Science Alert. We'll be talking about Obama's torture report or the Obama administration's torture report. We'll be talking about Trump's executive orders, all sorts of different things.
All the things we can get to and more right here on Paleo Radio Show. Don't go anywhere.
are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Welcome back to 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. My name is Joe Elder, along with Jeremiah Bannister.
It's true, the one and only Paleocrat with a capital P. It's totally me.
And we have a fantastic guest on the line. Before we bring him in, we can do our always professional intros. Dan Arel is the best-selling author of The Secular Activist and Parenting Without God books. He is also an award-winning journalist whose work can be found on The Hill, Time Magazine, The New Arab, Counterpunch, and more. He runs a blog on Patheos Network called Danthropology and also hosts the Danthropology podcast. Welcome on, Dan Arel.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're so happy that you've joined us, Comrade Arel. We wanted to bring you on. There's been plenty of talk. Number one, you're a fantastic contributor, and we've been following your work for quite some time, and we do love it. So I have to get that out of the way first. But we've been talking a conversation about classical liberals. We're going to jump right into it, by the way.
Right.
All right. Go for it.
We have two segments, and we want to get into
Right
the
out of
meat,
the
so
gate,
I might as
man.
well just say it. We've been talking about how classical liberals help to normalize white nationalism and elect Donald Trump, or at least that's been a claim that's out there. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that and how you feel about that situation entirely.
Sure. So, I've written a couple pieces about classic liberalism, and even, you can make it a little bit more broad and look at like some mainstream media that's more on the liberal side that has taken this idea that you can't call a racist anymore. And they let like the alt-right say, oh, we're the alt-right, and then they espouse white nationalist views nonstop, but then the media says, oh, so the alt-right, and they never label it what it is. And when you do that, people seem to become numb to what their message is, and they disassociate white nationalism with the alt-right. And then you see the same thing when you have classical liberals, and I'll just say such as like Dave Rubin, who put a guest on their show, and which is fine. I think shows should do that. They should bring guests that they disagree with and then challenge them, talk to them, make them stand up for what they're claiming. But what you have is these, I like the term free speech warrior, and they don't stand up. They say, oh, you need, unquestioned right to speech, and then they let someone like Milo or worse come on their show and then say these awful things while the host nods along and then, oh, well, thank you for coming. Yeah. And so what's the viewer get from that? They hear these horrible ideas and then a guest or a host that they think, oh, you know what, I respect this person, he's a great thinker. And, well, he doesn't seem to have much disagreement there. And that normalizes that, puts these ideas that these might be valid, points in people's heads. And then, you open the door for Muslim bans and Donald Trump to walk right into office.
I used to listen to Rubin and watch his show and the like, and I enjoyed the fact that he would bring on people that normally would not get any viewing in mainstream sources. The only problem, and I noticed this, is I started saying it was kind of like he's the opposite of Vic Berger, from Super Deluxe, that only makes hilarious memes against Trump, and his comedy seems to be quite partisan. Whereas on the Rubin side of things, he brings people on. And it seems that they're all kind of in the same part of the Overton window, right? They're all this kind of YouTube atheist, alt-right perspective, anti-feminist perspective. And he doesn't have on nearly as often any kind of competing voice. Any kind of...
Right.
And that when he does have any competing voice on, he doesn't seem to be as agreeable with them as he does with others that come on that may be on the right or the hard right.
Like Larry Elder.
Right.
He agrees a lot with Larry Elder's perspective and didn't really give any counterweights. I'm a big Rubin viewer as well, and I've noticed that about him is that he's kind of running from the same track. And like you said, Dan, about normalizing these beliefs, do you think that the better answer would be to and I'm not saying this facetiously, but to shout them down or shout them out of that public space, or do you think it would be to take their bad idea and just eviscerate it in front of everybody? I mean, that's a really way to delegitimize, right?
I think it has to come twofold. So we have to look at it at two different perspectives. So yes, I think the ultimate and the best way of doing it is to use our arguments to counter theirs, to render them fools, basically. So they put our argument forward, and we counter it with a better argument, and people say, "Oh wow, like that's better." But what happens is someone like Milo gets booked to go to speak on a university, and he gets on stage, and then he doxes a trans person, and he puts their picture up on the screen, and he harasses them and makes fun of them to the point where these students end up leaving the school because they feel so threatened. And then he goes to the next school, and protesters show up and say, "Not on our campus," and they shut the thing down. And then people think, well, you can't do that. We have to counter their bad ideas with ours. But to a degree, we have to also stand up for the people that they're going to attack and that they're going to make feel unsafe and flee schools. If this was Geraldo Rivera showing up to talk about trickle-down economics, I would say don't go shout him down and try to stop his thing, because he's not technically trying to hurt people specifically. He's trying to put forward an idea that he thinks will help people, and we need to put forward a better idea and show why his doesn't. If he got up there and said, this student needs to be harassed and is doing this, then I would say shout him down. So I think we have to look at it at two levels, where we have to have multiple strategies of dealing with what they want to throw at us.
Sure. Do you think that when people do come to shout down a guy like Milo, for instance, that if it was an analogy of a car, that's actually his gas? What gets Milo signed and going to other places and keeps the fervor behind him is actually that he's more well-equipped to deal with a shouting, angry crowd than he is with a crowd of people who would actually come in and sit and listen to him. I mean, I honestly think the most viewed videos of Milo Yiannopoulos are without a doubt the ones where someone comes barging into his speech and he gets to yell at them, because he knows what to do with that.
They make highlight videos out of it.
And
Trigglypuff. I mean, they make memes out of it. They make memes out of "get your hate speech off my campus." Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems to, like what Joe's saying, I mean, doesn't that almost fuel it?
It can't. So there is an inherent risk in that's what he feeds off of. I mean, I think back to the early 90s and being a goth kid in high school and going to a Marilyn Manson concert, and there being huge crowds outside protesting, and that made it more exciting. That made the shows better. That made the press show up. So it did put a spotlight on it. At the same time, when the press shows up and does sort of give that fuel that Milo's looking for, number one, we get a good chance of putting our voice forward. So we get to say why we're there, if the press does their job and interviews both sides. Mm-hmm. But secondly, we do have to take a certain amount of risk in that if the ends justify the means. So if we know that shutting down a Milo speech on a campus can be a make or break deal for a student on that campus who has a high probability of being harassed and, literally dropping out of school to get away from it, then I think I'm willing to let Milo feel great about himself for the night if I know that he didn't get his extreme point of view across. And so there is a balancing act. I'm not a big fan of storming in to his speeches and screaming and disrupting them. Mm-hmm. I think we need to keep it outside. And the goal shouldn't necessarily be to shut him down. It should be to be a louder voice there. And a lot of times the shutdowns happen because the promoters, shut them down. It's actually rare that it's shut down because of any sort of harassment from the people on the outside.
Sure.
And I mean, a great example is Seattle. I mean, a protester was shot by a Milo supporter, and they still had to talk that night.
Wow.
So it's not that showing up is necessarily going to shut it down. It's that you're making your voice loud and clear that your campus does not tolerate this hate and that you're going to be there to counter it. And, you're going to put two volatile sides together. Unfortunately, someone got shot and almost lost their life. But that didn't even shut down Milo's speech. And Milo didn't even blink an eye at it.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that is a very fair point, because, like you were saying, having a group that's out there to voice their displeasure, that's one thing. When the group breaks that mold of going in or disrupting it, I really think that's where he's best equipped to fight. And I honestly, I can say this with great confidence. I loathe Milo Yiannopoulos' ideas. I think he's not a very classy guy. I don't think he's got very strong arguments, but I think he survives almost on the hate of the people around him. Like, he thrives off of that. And if you even reduce that, I don't know how he would handle it.
Yeah, we want to talk a lot more about this kind of stuff. And actually, I want to touch on the resistance, ask some questions about it being a vehicle or a tactic of opposition. And I want to ask about, and I don't want to get too much into it, but the situation with Spencer, and if maybe you have taken anything from what Matthew O'Neill posted on your on Danthropology blog. And in fact, I thought it was excellent. I commend you for having a point-counterpoint like that on your Danthropology blog. But we'll talk about a lot of this stuff. We're going to put you on hold for a second here, Dan, so don't go anywhere. And everybody listen, we encourage you, stay tuned. After this break, we've got more with Dan Arel of Danthropology over at Patheos. He's an at-large member of the Socialist Party USA. He's a member of their Labor and Living Wage Committee, as well as the Eco-Socialism Committee. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Paleo Radio.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
Welcome back to Paleo Radio, live in studio here. You guys can call us, 616-656-1680, to join the conversation. We're continuing our convo with Dan Arel, the writer of Patheos.com. Welcome back, Dan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, that music's a little bit hot on the intro there.
Yeah, sorry about that. We apologize. We get so caught up liquid dancing and popping and locking here in the studio, Dan, we just forget to turn it down.
Happens so fast.
It happens so fast. So listen, we're talking with Dan Arel. He's the writer over at Danthropology. You can find him over at Patheos. A fantastic guy. He's got a very active social media presence. We don't always see eye to eye, but, I find that, honestly, to be one of the reasons why I most enjoy following him. And so it's a real pleasure. And once again, thank you for joining Paleo Radio, Dan.
Of course.
All right. So the question about the resistance, following you're a spearhead of this kind of thing. And so break it down for people who may not follow GQ or Keith Olbermann or anything like that about the resistance, or who don't watch RT or Democracy Now! Let our listeners know what is meant by #the resistance.
Sure. So the resistance is really, it's our opposition to not simply Donald Trump, but to his entire administration and the policies that they're looking to put forward. And, it's the policies that we've already seen come to light within, only 8 days. Now we're on, 9 days? But you've got, the Muslim ban is a great example of the resistance in action. So you have people showing up and doing what must be done to make the not just the government but the world and this country and everyone know that the American people don't support what our government's doing. It's a unique way of saying that Trump won the election with a massive minority of the vote due to our electoral college system, and that doesn't. And for us, it doesn't mean to say that he didn't win, because we understand that in this system he did, but that his policies are not representative of the country as a whole. And so when the Muslim ban went into effect, as you saw, thousands of people showed up to airports all over the country. And, many of them barged inside. They stopped traffic. Taxis in New York stopped going in solidarity. You saw a massive resistance. And then you saw the lawsuits come in, and then suddenly, a blow to the knee at this, and suddenly, Trump's down, and he's losing his stronghold, and that really encompasses what we must be for the next 4 years. That's the resistance. That is being in total opposition and ready to go at all times to make sure that the people, the minority groups, especially that Trump is targeting, have a full-scale, I'm going to use the word army very metaphorically here, but army of people ready to go out and put up that barrier and say, you're not touching them.
Yeah.
We're here. We're not letting this happen. And really, that's the resistance. And it's a lot different than we saw, in 2000 and 2004 with George Bush, where, we had the whole "not my president" thing kind of blow up. But even then, it was a couple of protests and then not a lot, because it was the enemy we knew. It was the regular Republicans doing what Republicans do, and we sort of stuck to our regular tactics. This time around, not even the Republicans know what to make of what's happening half the time.
Yeah.
And so the resistance has had to step up and had to be a real force. And within only a week, we've already had to mobilize and show up and prove that we're going to be there.
Yeah. Is comparing the resistance to the Tea Party a false equivalency?
Yes and no. It's a false equivalency in the fact that the Tea Party was upset that we had a black president. I mean, that was their biggest thing, was that our president was black. And the proof for that, anyone that doesn't, really want to believe that claim because it sounds too hyperbolic, just go look up some of their very early protests when they had, Obama hanging from a string. Go back to Kenya was their sign. They had all of these, very racist signage that was leading their cause and rallying these people. The opposition-wise, the fact that they were loud, they got people elected, they mobilized and were successful. That's not a false equivalence. We actually should probably learn something from that, because Occupy failed to learn from that. Occupy showed up to a park and then said, look, we're going to, care about these 45,000 different things, and we're going to list them all, and no one's going to know what we stand for.
Right. And that was one of the things I reported really heavily on Occupy. I went down to a number of the encampments. I used to watch the live streams. They actually made it really convenient, because you could click on any live stream of a number of camps around the world at any time, kind of with this hub that they had. And I used to report on them, and I saw that same thing happening. In the beginning, you kind of have this very central message and theme, and then as it gets bigger, it turned into this thing where there was a bazillion different themes, and one of them that stood out the most was "We have no leader." So there was no organizational construct that could actually deliver and say, this is it. This is what we're talking about. And I watched as it dissipated, and I think there are a number of internal and external factors to this. But I wonder, though, what do you do? What should the resistance do in a situation where, for example, the withdrawing from the TPP? I mean, I voted for Bernie in the primary, and that was one of the things that I really wanted Bernie Sanders to do. And if Bernie Sanders had been elected, and Bernie Sanders did an executive order that said, we're out of this thing, we're done, we're done with that, I would applaud him for that. Even if I disagreed with him on a number of other things. How does the resistance, how do you anticipate they'll deal with situations where Trump may do things that otherwise, if Bernie got in, they would be actually quite excited about?
Yeah, and I think we should be excited when they happen, and even if they happen on accident. His reasoning for getting out of the TPP is way different than Bernie. So, he's coming at it at a different angle. But what we have is, we could say, look, we got what we wanted, but now we have to keep the pressure on for what he wants to do instead. And so we can be happy, but then we have to be vigilant in making sure that any sort of other trade agreement, any sort of thing that he tries to do in a replacement or to, do his America First policy, we need to stay vigilant on, because the one thing we've noticed is, in the off chance that we generally agree with Trump on issue one, the thing that he has behind it is something we don't agree with. And so it becomes one of those, playing catch up. Great, thanks for speaking out against that, but stop right there. Your replacement is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, look at Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. On the left, those of us on the far left, like myself, you mentioned before break that, I'm a member of the Socialist Party. We're not fans of Obamacare. It's a market-driven, unaffordable health insurance plan. It isn't health care. It isn't, universal. It isn't helping everybody. At the job I had previous, I had health care. I couldn't even afford to use it. Prices weren't where they should be.
Yeah.
But we're not necessarily applauding the fact that he wants to overturn Obamacare, because what he wants to do with it, number one, we don't know. But number two, all signs point to something even worse, something more market-driven, something even less people can afford. And so it has to be that balancing act of, great, we wanted this fixed or off the table, but what's the replacement? And, a lot of us had more trust in Bernie that by undoing or, leaving TPP, he could do something better.
Yeah.
But we don't have that sort of trust in Trump. We don't think he's going to do something better. We think he's going to do something that's America first and is going to hurt, foreign countries that, are struggling and really do rely on us and commerce in that sense.
I wanted to ask you about this, and it's changing gears a little bit, but you wrote something recently, and you said the atheist community has a chance of being a movement, one that can wield great power in the reaffirmation of America as a secular nation. However, it got into bed with the wrong crowd and moved into the far-right landscape because of a failure to evaluate Islam at the same critical level they do all other religion. But you said in another recent article that atheism is the non-belief in gods, the end. It doesn't color your views on race, sexual orientation, etc. I'm curious to hear from you how those two things work together, or if they do.
So they do and they don't. And honestly, this is since the election itself, since Inauguration Day, this has just gone full steam ahead, and the landscape is changing, I think, every single day. And it's becoming almost frightening to the fact that in 2014, I called on Huffington Post for a complete worldwide atheist movement. And I said, we don't agree on a lot of political things, but as one giant force of people, we can wield a lot of power in the sense of, we need to secularize. We need, in America, there needs to be a wall of separation between church and state that's very firm. Theocracies around the world need to be, giving women their rights and children rights and all of these things. And then once we've achieved that kind of goal, well, we can all start arguing about what kind of economy we should have and how healthcare should work and things like that. But what I've noticed, and, so in the first quote, is that I'm noticing the atheist quote-unquote movement going further right. I mean, they're following that Dave Rubin path, which is something I feared and hoped that we would never go down. So I think there is a movement that could exist, but we have to separate that from non-belief in a sense.
Yeah.
So you have atheism is the fact that none of us believe in God. That's the only thing we have in common.
Yes.
At that level. And we have to be aware of that. If we start to think that atheism unites us on multiple fronts, then we're just going to fight with each other and it all falls apart.
Yeah,
which it is doing.
Yes, that's a great point, Dan. That goes into the groupthink. This is selfless plug to him, obviously, but Sam Harris Waking Up podcast. I've been listening to that as well. I'm trying to kind of diversify it all out, but what Sam Harris talks about is saying that there's groupthink going on when you can hear someone say that they're pro-life and you can also assume that they're extremely religious, or you can think that they're pro-gun because they're also pro-life. And these things are all separate. They're separate ideas that show that there is a groupthink going on. But I think you touched on the real point, which was maybe people got it wrong in the first place, that atheism was a liberal movement or a conservative one or anything, because the only thing we have in common is a lack of belief in something, which is not a very strong tie to pull a rope with,
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
I just think that it's something worth noting that I believe that a lot of people, Jeremiah and I are both non-believers. We've seen in our community of people be awfully surprised that there are conservative atheists. Now, to me, that wasn't a surprise at all, because I assumed that having only one non-belief is not much of a tying in point. So I assumed that naturally there was going to be pro-life atheists, there would be pro-choice atheists, there would be atheists that are extremely conservative, atheists that would be extremely liberal. You'd get the gambit.
South Park atheists.
Atheists.
South Park atheists would exist too. I'm just saying that it seems like a hodgepodge, a mishmash.
Yeah.
It does. And I think what also really does sort of drive a lot of our thinking, and this is, I think, and I can't speak for you, but for me, I know I'm guilty of it, and I see other people guilty of it often, is that a lot of us exist in a sort of bubble. Like, and I don't mean that in a really derogatory sense. Like, but, you know, we spend a lot of time on Facebook or on Twitter with atheists. And we tend to look at that as the community. And in our head, and I think it's a natural thing to do. That's where you're talking to people the most. That's where you're hanging out with people a lot. Even in your own local groups, you start hanging out with those people, and that becomes, you know, your community. And you start applying that across the board. And so that becomes your view of atheism. And you can sometimes forget that for the, you know, maybe a couple of million atheists on Twitter, there's hundreds of millions more around the world that you're never going to speak to, and you're never going to know what their beliefs are and their thoughts are. But I think one thing we can generally at least think the majority is pro-secularism. Now, I can't say we can say that about all of them. I mean, look at someone like S.E. Cupp at CNN. She seems pretty anti-secular half the time. She always talks about how she wished she believed in God and thinks that we need religious leaders all the time.
Yeah, she wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, you can't apply this across the board. But when I talk movement these days, I'm really saying movement-wise, we need to have that, like, look, we may all disagree on so much, but we agree that one thing is true, and that we need to find a way to do something with that. And if that means that we can spread some form of secular message together as a unity, let's do it.
That music's coming in. We'll be right back. Stay on, and we'll be a couple minutes with Dan Arel. Don't go anywhere.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
All right, we're back with a couple more minutes here with Dan Arel. We want to thank him for being so generous. We kind of put him on the spot going into a break here just a moment ago, but we're really grateful to have him on. He's a writer over at Danthropology blog over at Patheos. Again, Dan, thank you for joining the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
We wanted to touch on one last thing, and as I said, you know, we really didn't want to make it a big deal because the atheist community, for those who actually, you know, are paying attention to it, saw it kind of go bonker town for a minute, and there was a lot of people going out there posting screenshots of stuff and everything else, and it was kind of crazy for a second. But I liked how your blog handled it, how you wrote a piece, and it was in reference to a protester punching Richard Spencer, okay? And for those who don't know, he's kind of the Godfather guy. He's a iconic figure for the alt-right. And so there was, on your blog, you had a piece where you defended the use of violence to a degree, right? Not crazy violence, but you were making a case for certain forms of violent protest, emphasizing nonviolence. But you had another article that was posted, another blog that was posted by Matthew O'Neill. And I was curious if you could just break that down for us, and just if Matthew said anything in his piece that made you think. And I'm curious for your thoughts.
Sure. So, yeah, I think Matthew is a wonderful thinker. He's a wonderful writer, and he's someone whose opinions and thoughts I actually admire. So when he came out on the opposite side of me, that actually meant something to me. It wasn't somebody who I was like, I don't care what they think about things because they're always wrong, so why would I care? No, it was somebody, and I think he makes very valid points, and I think it's worth emphasizing that we really should be, in all cases, thinking nonviolence first. So can we shut down arguments with arguments? How powerful is the movement that we're dealing with? And what situation are we in? Are people already being hurt or in terrible cases killed? And, you know, what do we have to do to stop that? And one thing I've always tried to be careful of is I don't want people to just go stand in front of Richard Spencer's house. And every time he walks out the door, you run out and try to throw a punch. That's counterproductive, and that doesn't actually achieve the goal that we're going for here. But I think, so I say to someone like Matthew and to others who are like, I am completely nonviolent, and not necessarily even pacifist, but just, look, even Gandhi said, use violence if you see someone pointing a gun at me. But he's a pacifist, and he was nonviolent in many ways. And we need that. That's important. And we should all strive to have that. But for me, when Richard Spencer got hit, my first reaction was he had it coming. And I smiled. Now, not my proudest moment, but whatever. Like, sometimes we get pleasure out of things that people we think deserve. Then I thought, well, is this okay or not? Can we justify this? And I thought to myself, yes. But I'm a white, straight male. If Nazis took over the U.S. tomorrow, I could just walk down the street and be fine. I'm not really at risk here. So I searched out voices of the marginalized communities that would be upset by this and that would face real persecution, and said, what do you think? And those are the voices I listened to, like Sincere Carabo from The Humanist, when he said that punching a Nazi was self-defense. And other people said, yeah, but you're just going to incite them to cause more violence against, they said to cause violence against minority groups. And they said they already are. This is us swinging in self-defense already. We're already having to fight back because they're already growing. And so the argument I tried to make in my case was that the punch can be justified. And I think that punch against Spencer was justified because of what Spencer is trying to accomplish. He's not just a KKK member who thinks black people need to live on the other side of the street and that he gets his white community. Spencer is someone who has published articles on his website that have literally asked the question, do people of color, or he said, do black people serve a purpose in our society? And how would we best peacefully, ethnically cleanse them?
Yes.
That guy gets a
that's
punch
right. It's absolute hate speech. My question is that when it gets into the argument of acting in self-defense, I wonder if someone who is, for instance, I know we were talking about it before in the other segment, but it's just an interesting idea, I think, or can play the game. What if someone is pro-life and views that they can be violent towards pro-choice people because they are actually acting in self-defense of the unborn and that whole jazz? Now, I don't think that that's actually a true statement, but I can see someone being able to take that argument and run with it the other direction and say, we should be able to, in the public sphere, go after people who are pro-choice because they are already going after the unborn.
Right.
What do you think?
And the truth is, they do. Mm-hmm. I mean, Robert Deere just not that long ago walked into a Planned Parenthood and shot 3 people. He shot more than 3, but he killed 3 people. The problem with that, and where we have to be careful is you start bordering on that whole slippery slope analogy, is that we have to make sure that the arguments we're making are justified. So we know, factually speaking, abortion's not murder. We have science is on that side, and I use the same comes from atheists. A lot of times atheists have made the argument that now Christians are going to feel that they can just walk up and punch us in the face because they think atheism is a threat to their belief. And the answer to that is yes, they can, but we know they'd be wrong to do so. We can empirically prove that atheism isn't actually threatening their life, their livelihood, their place. We're not putting Christians in trains, and we can show that all we're doing is saying we don't believe in God. And if any movement there is to speak out against, it's that we're saying you believe in your house, in your church, and on your own, and don't impose that on me. We've never threatened violence back. We've never done anything like that. And so there's the same sort of, we have to make sure that we don't fall into that trap of saying, oh, you're right. Because I view it as a point of cowardice if I said, if I saw a Nazi espousing genocide and I had a chance to silence him in that moment with my fist, and I didn't because I was afraid that down the road a Christian might punch me in the head, I feel like it's kind of cowardice because I have a responsibility to stop the ending of other people's lives. And, well, go ahead.
I'm wondering, as you were talking, when people talked in the election about Trump and the impact that he would have and the influence he has on society and how it will embolden people, one of the things that they said it would embolden would be this kind of bullying thing going on. And I'm wondering, and that it was a bad example to children, right? That what do you say to your kids? I mean, that was a popular thing for a while that a lot of people were saying, even politicians, even Hillary and others saying, what do we tell the children about this? And I thought about it in context of this and said, there are kids on school campuses that are just total bullies, that they love bullying, they say terrible things. But I don't know of any progressive that would be okay with creating an environment wherein people, let's say they're an 18-year-old in high school, right? There's an environment wherein the proper way to deal with bullying is anything other than going and telling an authority or going and going to your club or whatever, that you would take it into your own hands and that you would decide that is warranted. And I wonder what kind of an example that is for children who see that kind of thing, and that the arguments being made are, well, listen, these people are fueling a systemic problem, because that's what bullies would be doing inside of a school environment as well. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that and why it would play out seemingly with two different standards: one, an expectation for children dealing with and high schoolers dealing with bullying. And people outside of the school environment dealing with bullying.
Of course, I think you bring up a good point that this is a wonderful teaching experience. This is a wonderful chance to have these discussions, because you're right. If my kid came home and said that there was a bully at school and he was bullying him, and I wouldn't say go to school and punch him. I would give him every opportunity to go to the teacher, go to anybody in charge, and make a case to diffuse that situation and to get out of it without violence. But if my son came home and said, I got suspended today because I punched a bully, and I said, why did you do that? He said, because he grabbed, Joe by the neck and started dragging him down the stairs and there was nobody around, and I hit him to stop him, I wouldn't be mad at my kid. I would have a conversation with him about, about that and how that made him feel and everything, and there's other things he could have done. But if he knew that someone was about to be pummeled and beaten or, hurt badly, and the only thing he could do to stop him was to hit him, well, could you fault him for standing up for somebody? I don't think so. Even if it was technically the wrong thing to do, it was probably, actually the right thing to do, because somebody else could have gotten very hurt.
It would be a degree of immediacy, you think? Like
exactly
how immediate the threat would be, and how immediate the threat of Spencer would be as well, and looking at that through that lens. But we're really grateful to have you on the show, and we're grateful that you allowed us to extend it to ask you a couple more questions.
Oh, I'm happy to.
Yeah, thanks again, Dan. We really appreciate it. And for those folks, you can let everybody know on your page too, Dan. Anyone who missed it, we'll give you an audited or an edited copy that you can put out for the audio for everybody to listen to.
Yeah, highlight.
So,
awesome.
Yeah,
right.
I appreciate it.
Thank you again. And just so everyone knows, we'll roll you out the right way. Dan Arel, again, best-selling author and secular activist in Parenting Without God, the book. Also award-winning journalist whose work can be found on The Hill, Time Magazine, New Arab, Counterpunch, and much more, and is the owner and operator of Danthropology and the Danthropology podcast. Thank you again, Dan Arel. Much appreciated,
Yes,
sir.
thank you so much for being on Paleo Radio.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Yes, have a good one.
Tons of fun. Make sure to share that interview with your friends. Joe, we're on the last segment coming up here,
Yes,
bud.
last segment.
This is crazy.
We're going to try to smash in as much as we can here in this last 15 minutes, see if we can get two topics. If not, we will opine about one with great expediency.
We'll be right back.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
616-656-1680 to join the conversation here in studio, WPRR, Paleo Radio. I'm Joe Elder.
I'm Jeremiah Bannister. And you know, Joe, I just realized that we do not have a question of the day.
We don't have a question of the day.
No, we just decided we're done
Yeah,
today
we're
with
not
that.
doing it. So
we're not doing it today, folks.
You guys you're taking so many of our amazing stickers and magnets that we have to keep them to ourselves. You're just running us ranshot.
So let's talk about real quick this article that we mentioned earlier and we started to get into before Stan called the show earlier on, before the interview with Dan Arel. And if you missed it, make sure to go to Spreaker.com/PaleoRadio or go to iTunes where you can also hear our programs. Natural selection is causing a decline in human education genes, say scientists. Is our species on a downward spiral? This
Yes.
is by Science Alert. Yes.
The answer is yes. No.
The genes that predispose people to attain higher levels of education have been in decline over the past 80 years. The researchers are suggesting that they are now under negative selection, which could have a big impact on our species in the coming centuries. And hey, it would seem as if negative selection would have that impact on our species. Like, I can't imagine it being like, that's actually real good.
Well, yes. If you look at it, that's the whole thing, too, is when people think of natural selection, they always think of it's survival of the fittest, and they think fittest is the biggest, the strongest. And that's not the case. It's actually who's most adapted to the environment. And the truth is that a dumber person may be more adapted to this environment than a more clever one. And in terms of just reproduction, like you're talking about the success of a species, who reproduces more, and this is very stereotypical, but lesser educated people reproduce more. They make more babies. There's more genes coming from that than there are the intelligence genes. And over time, that weighs in on your culture and your group.
To be clear, this does not necessarily mean that humans are getting dumber. We're going to need a whole lot more evidence to get anywhere near a conclusion like that. There's also the fact that more people are getting access to education than ever before. So even if less educated people are having more offspring, non-genetic factors like more schools could counteract and even eclipse the effect. But if we look at the trend over the course of several centuries into the future, they're not entirely.
It's not entirely
they're not
good.
as sure.
Yeah, that's what I mean, and that's good. They had a counterpunch to my point there. But the other case is, do we want to put all of our eggs in that basket? I don't really know. I think it'd be a good idea to try to preserve some education genes.
Justice Department, speaking about preserving something, Justice Department balks at securing CIA torture report at federal court by Carol Rosenberg at the Miami Herald. And, you know, I thought this was interesting, Joe, because there is this report, right, that is really important that was issued, and people are wanting a copy of it to make it public, and it was declined. Obama declined to use his authority to declassify it, meaning the earliest it could become public is in 2028.
Yes, which is very common of an outgoing administration. And it's not to say that it's acceptable. It's just the same things with dark sites and Abu Ghraib and all those things. You know, obviously that wasn't declassified by the Bush administration on their way out. Obama administration following the status quo here. Not going to give us information about what they were doing in their dark sites.
Yeah, and that's what it would be hiding, about detainees being kept naked, deprived of food and sleep, rectally abused, waterboarded, and shackled in so-called stress positions. All of that stuff. And it was the American Civil Liberties Union sued for a government copy, is now asking the U.S. Supreme Court to decide. So that's another big one. Also, gag orders, Joe.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one. You've been following that, too. The gag orders on telling people what they can and can't say.
Yes, this is a gag order on scientists, basically. The U.S. Department of Agriculture cannot speak to the press. They cannot have press releases, instituting a social media restriction on the National Park Services. U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the APA, is also issued an internal guidance on Monday via email stating that its employees would require approval for media interviews and that the EPA would be halting its own press releases and communications, or at least temporarily. And this has caused a lot of social media, Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts for the EPA and national parks to go rogue, which is a very interesting thing.
It's interesting, too, because, You have some people, the USDA, for example, came out and said that this was misunderstood. They said there was a second email that was issued late Tuesday to clear things up about the initial message sent earlier that day. Quote, "The announcement that our administrator sent to staff last night was less a rescinding of anything than it was a clarification." He also played down any kind of curb on press releases and public statements. He says, "This is what has happened at the transition of every administration. It's just a pause." The EPA also told Scientific American that in a statement Wednesday that they're reviewing their public affairs policies. Quote, "A fresh look at public affairs and communications process is common practice for any new administration, and a short pause in activities allows for this assessment." So you have a couple that say, departments that are like, this isn't actually a deal. But then you have others like Mark Halpern, Deputy Director of the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. He disagrees. Dave Laubel, a Stanford University agricultural scientist, he also disagrees and says that it was a real problem, what was going on.
Yeah. Dave Laubel says, "Our society deeply depends on good science, and good science depends on open communication. If I were on one of these boards, I'd see that it is a sign that the administration does not appreciate the critical role that science plays in our nation's success." I also would say, too, that having a freeze on what they're going to be saying for a certain amount of time is one thing, but the way the Trump administration asked for everyone's name who was working in climate science before this happened, when he was president-elect, I think that also has heated up the frying pan a little bit for people, where they're like, well, he was asking for a list of names, and now he's causing the freeze. They're asking for the freeze. So I think there's a little bit more to it. And also with his policies economically and what he's viewing for coal, I think people are reading between the lines and seeing that this may be an early attempt at stopping the conversation about carbon emissions and coal and his economic plans from the departments that are under his wing. I mean, I really think it could be.
Right. And so that's yet to be determined, story developing. But hey, there's signs and indications, it seems, that would lead people to have reasonable worries. You mentioned freeze, and it just made me think of this. But physicists have found a metal that conducts electricity but not heat.
Yeah, this is huge.
This is people. It's one of those things where science can be really tricky, where when you read of a discovery, it goes, wow, so what? You have a metal that conducts electricity but not heat. Who cares? That's massive.
That's massive.
Like that could be life-changing for you.
That is, if you think about it in terms of energy and energy coming in as electricity or giving off as heat and what you can lose, that means that you're losing less. You are having less of a runoff, basically, of your energy output. You can get 100%. Right now, with most electronics, 15% is dissipated. It doesn't even get to whatever you're trying to use. So when you plug in the vacuum cleaner, 15% of the electricity that's going into it is actually escaping. It's not even being conducted properly. This is something that can harness that extra 15%. And if anyone thinks about margins, 15% is flipping huge.
Massive. In a study published by Science, researchers have identified a metal that conducts electricity without conducting heat, an incredibly useful property that defies our current understanding of how conductors work. It's a piece by Fiona McDonald over at Science Alert, and she says the metal contradicts something called is it Wiedemann-Franz law?
Yeah, the Wiedemann-Franz.
Yeah, which basically states that good conductors of electricity will also be proportionally good conductors of heat, which is why things like motors and appliances get so hot when you use them regularly.
Absolutely. So you're talking about things that don't overheat when you use them or when you're running electricity a lot. This is great news. And on top of that, this is early accounts. We don't have the info on this, but this is just to throw it out there, that there's been some early developments in turning hydrogen into a metal, which if you have that, then you also have improved conductivity. And so what we're talking about here is supercomputers, heavy electricity flows. You would be able to have batteries that are storing electricity, solar power, solar panels. This is huge to be able to hold 15% more of your electric flow. I mean, this is good news.
I like what they said about this. Not only does this unexpected property change what we know about conductors, it could also be incredibly useful. The metal could one day be used to convert wasted heat from engines and appliances back into electricity, or even create better window coverings that keep buildings cool.
Yeah, think about that.
So just real practical things even. I mean, people, what do you do with the waste? With the wasted heat from engines and appliances, what do you do with that?
Yeah, as of right now, we let it just go up into the air.
And that's it.
It does nothing.
It does nothing.
We're getting nothing out of it.
And we're figuring out how to transform that.
Yeah.
Into where we can use that.
Basically, if we're running a business, we're cutting our overhead and increasing efficiency. It's a all-around great deal. It's good stuff.
You know, lastly, we'll talk about this Flint thing because we only got about a minute.
Yep.
Maybe a minute and a half, whatever. But talking about how Republican federal lawmakers have shot down an attempt to subpoena Governor Rick Snyder for additional documents tied to the Flint water crisis. It's over on M Live by Una Gooden-Smith. And it says, at a House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform meeting on Tuesday, January 24, House Republican members voted unanimously to defeat an amendment put forward by Democrats seeking to subpoena Snyder for documents related to the city's water. And what's interesting is that Chaffetz, right? Chaffetz, the chairperson of the congressional committee, if I remember correctly, he was down with this at first.
Yeah, he was heading the charge for a while. It seems like he's gotten distracted.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder what caused that. You know, but there was a vote on a motion to subpoena Snyder, quote, to compel the production of key documents that he's been withholding from the committee for the past year, including evidence relating to his destruction of emails. That seems to be really important.
Well, yeah.
And especially in the context of people complaining, including me, about emails not being
That's right.
Emails being destroyed, emails not being given, being not very transparent about them.
And Rick Snyder took a page right out of Hillary Clinton's book and watched how she did this, and he released a controlled 3,000 emails and has been saying, that's enough emails for you. I've given you what you asked for, which were well-crafted and well looked through and vetted emails to make sure that there's nothing inappropriate in them. So Snyder's getting away with murder here.
Yeah, getting away with murder. Old man Time's cutting us off, Joe. It's the end of the show.
It is the end of the show, man. It happened so fast.
This was amazing.
Yes. Thank you guys for listening to the show.
Yes.
We're going to be on next week, as always, with another round of fantastic topics for you all.
And a big thank you to Dan Arel. Listen, if you missed the show, share it with your friends. We're on a replay. Check us out at publicrealityradio.org.
And don't forget to follow us on social media, on Twitter and Facebook at PaleoRadio Show. Thank you guys very much for listening. We will see you all next week.